Hello and welcome to the Wine Room. And back in the 1930s, at a DuPont laboratory down in Wilmington, Delaware, something quite interesting happened which has implications for the world of wine. Now, I don't know if you've ever been into a DuPont factory, but I certainly have, and I have to tell you, I've never been anywhere where the emphasis on health and safety has been stronger than there is in DuPont. But I'm pleased to tell you that that was not the case in the 1930s, when a Dr. Fox was preparing a brand new chemical solution, which is known as the by PTC, because I mean the real name is kind of one of those daisy chains of impossible to pronounce syllables, but PTC will do. And he knocked it over. He knocked over the flask, and there was dust everywhere. And one of his colleagues turned around and said, "Oh my God, that's horrible. Oh, that's the bitterest thing I think I've ever tasted." But the interesting thing was, Dr. Fox couldn't taste it at all. So do you know what Fox did? Took it round everywhere in the factory. Went round and said, "Can you smell this? Can you smell this?" And what he found out was that 60% of the people working in the factory and in the laboratory couldn't smell it at all. Well, if you now shift forward a swift 60 years, in the 1990s, someone working at UC Davis in the Department of Enology decided to use this PTC, or in fact, a slightly safer, slightly modified version of it, and came up with the notion of super tasters, and the idea being that if you could recognize PTC, then you probably had particularly heightened powers of smell, and in consequence there was a lot of excitement in the wine industry that maybe it was possible to tailor wines to individual tastes, or perhaps even super tasters could be the ones who could decide what was good. But the trouble with it is that was then, and between 1990 and 2022, a great deal has happened, and we know a great deal more. We know, for example, that the bitterness here from PTC comes from just one receptor that we have in our brains for bitterness. But there are 24 others. And it's perfectly possible that whilst you might be sensitive to this, you might be completely insensitive to one of the others. We also now know that the astringency that tannins in red wine brings, that drying thing, may be something which isn't universally experienced, because we have, as we now know, very different levels of saliva flow. So our ability to replenish the lubrication in our mouths varies enormously. So it's perfectly possible that those people who say they don't like tannic red wines say that because they are having a completely different experience of it than you might have or I might have. And it's based on genetics. And so it seems to me that we should take a step back and not necessarily say, well, this is because someone has a limited experience of wine or hasn't become familiar with it, but we should be aware that the person who actually does like sweet wines may be someone for whom bitterness is almost intolerable.